You're tuned in to Reimagine 2021, version 11, the #1 virtual crypto and blockchain conference. In this next segment, our guest speakers answer the question, what is a decentralized autonomous organization, or DAO for short?
Now let's talk about the rise of DAOs and the interest as it's been increasing. So as DAOs have been increasing both in value and size, what specifically fascinates you about DAOs?
Look, a DAO, or a decentralized autonomous organization, is a pretty amazing innovation in the sense of, throughout most of history of the Republic and actually most of Europe for centuries, was this idea that hierarchical structures were the way it should be, and that corporations should emerge out of those hierarchical organizations, and that ownership should be concentrated in the hands of the few to protect the masses from themselves, I guess. I don't know. I think what a DAO does, it flips that construct on its head, and that's an incredibly exciting, incredibly liberating, incredibly democratizing innovation. And there's so many things that we could talk about from the standpoint of why was it believed for so long that a king should be the sovereign, or that a corporation should be sovereign or in charge, or the government should be hierarchical, when the vote of a democratized economy or citizenry is supposed to count. But what we find is, well, okay, but it's a representative democracy, and maybe your representative doesn't agree with that vote and has been paid to vote a different way. So all kinds of things. So by having a truly decentralized organization, you bring ownership down to the participants in that DAO. You bring governance down to the members of that DAO. And there are haters I shouldn't say haters. There are naysayers who will say that, oh, well, you don't want that. Those people aren't qualified to make those decisions. Like, says who? Right? It's kind of like the accredited investor laws, right? Why should we, quote unquote, protect investors from making some of the best investments on the planet? Things like venture capital and private equity. Maybe it's actually a walled garden. We're not protecting the lower level people, we're protecting the upper end people so they get it all to themselves. And so when we think about who set those rules in place, the people at the top, maybe these structures that challenge the hierarchy are actually a pretty good thing, but the people in power don't want to lose that power.
Have you been following DAOs, and what fascinates you about these organizational structures, right, of human coordination, really, and having one common goal and kind of tackling things? What fascinates you about DAOs?
Yeah, so I think the underlying theme in the development of technology over the last 50 years has been a combination of Moore's Law, network effects, and now decentralization, right? And decentralization took us from the moon landing, which was a big monolithic centralized undertaking, to PCs, internet, smartphones, crypto. And as part of crypto, right, we've seen that money can be basically changed from the inside out. But what about the idea of ownership itself, right? And ultimately, companies are made up of owners. What if we could eliminate that idea and say that the smart contract that you're creating is owned by no one, and it's just out there, right? And that's this idea of a decentralized autonomous organization, right? We just created, in partnership with a new alliance in Switzerland, a new type of token that was minted as an ERC-20 contract with code created by people, owned by this alliance that sits on the private key, but that will be spun out at some point where there is no more ownership into a DAO, because all of the tokens will have been distributed, right? And the alliance will cease to exist, and the DAO will basically make its own decisions based upon a voting mechanism in the code, right, that via the tokens that represent the DAO itself. And so you're going to see DAOs ultimately change everything, right? Think about autonomous vehicles. Why couldn't you have a car that was ultimately funded by, let's say, Tesla itself, put out into the public and said, eventually this car is going to be completely autonomous. No one's going to own it. It's going to own itself. It's going to drive itself around as a taxi and will charge money, right, to the public after Tesla has recouped its cost and made a profit. And then it will fix itself. And if it has to go to Tesla to get fixed, it will have a wallet to basically do, right? It will then figure out what to do at end of life and will just drive itself around and in theory be owned by no one. Why? What problem are we solving by saying I have a car that I own that sits idle 99.9% of the time, just looks good in a driveway, as opposed to being driven around all day, right, serving mankind for the better, right? So, and I'm just giving you one example, but this idea of an autonomous, unowned organization is going to change everything when it comes to how organizations are built, managed, and run.
I think they represent kind of this alternative to setting up like a formal entity, and they like have verifiable proof of ownership of these kind of like things, so to speak. So I think it's a great way for people to come together and quickly kind of have some sort of body that collectively shares value and wealth.
But what's blockchain's impact? How does blockchain allow DAOs to form?
Yeah, so I think blockchain is like an interesting enabling technology for DAOs, right? I mean, if you think about DAOs, it's basically community. But what makes it interesting on blockchain is now that you have different components that are necessary to have these organizations in a trustless manner. So examples of that is like all the transactions are public, right? So basically you can see which transactions are happening across different address wallet holders. So all the transactions are public, which kind of makes it a lot more comfortable for regular people to trust, oh, this organization is kind of running it that way, because you can literally kind of see all the transactions that are happening. The other part is that, DAOs oftentimes involve some sort of a tokens typically. And then I think of like what blockchain enables is like, internet enabled transfer of information very easily. Through that, now we can do email, like Google search, even Uber, Airbnb, etc. I think of blockchain, what it enables transfer of value to be as seamless as transfer information was for internet. And what that means is that if I were to send you tokens, basically it's very easy to send you tokens. I just need to know your address, and like as a DAO, I just need to know like how many tokens we're going to distribute to you. So I think these kind of fundamental enabling technology of blockchain with these addresses identity, enabling basically utilizing blockchain as a technology to value transfer as seamlessly as possible, and then building that basically a smart contract to basically do it at a scale, I think makes it what's interesting for a DAO to be on blockchain.
Why do you think members want to join a DAO?
Well, you're already part of a community, and that community has some, it might be conceptual, but to you it's material thing that exists that you care about. And there's a lot of other people that care about it. You all care about it together. Isn't it nice to be able to together decide where that thing goes and decide what happens to it? It's just a flexible way of thinking about where to take something that you all care about together.
A common goal.
Yeah, a common goal.
Yeah, a community common goal. No, and you're right. And I think what's unique or what's interesting about DAOs really, when we talk about it, is that we're also used to like the Web 2.0. So like a lot of these websites, your FANGs, right? Facebooks, Apples, and they extract value out of you. So what DAOs do is really kind of give value back to the community, which is great. You're actually like socially, and you're earning based off of your social network, which we spend most of our time in our social networks, whatever that is, on a platform, in person, virtual. So one thing that we do on the tech side is we run validators, nodes, really kind of secure the network, governing, right, the network. Do you think in the DAO situation, humans, it's human coordination, social scalability, can we govern ourselves?
Can we govern ourselves? I think that the answer is it depends on what tools and structures and values that we have collectively determined we share and we're going to use to build things with. I mean, a lot of governments today, they are collectively governed by their communities of citizens, and whether or not they work great, they do work to some extent. So we can definitely do it, but I think what really fascinates me is how efficient can we make it? How much can we align it with the people in the community? How much can we align everyone in the community to be thinking in similar ways? There's so much opportunity there, I think, that we have available with the DAO.
And to kind of riff off of that, like, do you think these DAOs are scalable with the members? And that's proposals. These things are pretty, you need to be active, you need to be committed to a DAO for it to be successful. If everybody's contributing, you have, X amount of members, you have 10 core members that are, every day waking up, this is their job. Do you think it's a scalable opportunity, to put proposals forth, execute it, and kind of make sure that the community sticks to its path?
So by default, I think no, actually. I think that we can't just hop into a Discord server and get it done. It's not going to happen. But I think that we could all, for example, agree collectively that, okay, this is a real thing. I'm pretty sure that has been done before, not in crypto, but elsewhere, is we can say, okay, when a new issue comes up, we're going to set some criteria for who should be talking about the issue, and we're going to choose 20 random people that meet that criteria, and they're going to get together, and they're going to figure out a proposal, and they're going to bring it back, and they're going to summarize it for everybody else to vote on. So I think it's a big risk with DAOs is who is actually engaging these things and making the decisions, but there are ways that we can plan around them if we're intentional about that being a value we hold as a community, as part of a DAO.
And the token might play a role on the incentive side to align that goal with everybody and vote in or out, would you say?
I think, so this is actually, I'm really excited to see play out, because in some sense it's awesome that everyone is well, not even in theory, that by fact, a token holder a lot of the times in these DAO votes. They just are. And that means that everyone is, in a sense, aligned, that they're putting their tokens in a place where they want to increase the value of their tokens collectively. At the same time, I think that there is a risk there of how you think about the trade-off between the individuals in the community and the capital in the project. And for the moment, these seem relatively aligned, which is awesome, but I do wonder, as more real capital comes into the space, if we will not have to see more creative mechanisms of breaking up those two halves of control of a protocol and of a community in order to achieve the right results for the community members.
So they're coordinating, right? Or logistically, like, coming together for a common goal, a community driven. Do you think that's like a scalable operation to kind of, hoard everybody together and see, as opposed to, hiring and kind of going that route?
I don't know. Look, I'm not really following like that closely, and partly it's because I haven't heard like a really compelling use case for DAO beyond the fact that it's super cool, but if once you start kind of depending on like a lot of people's opinions, one thing that we've learned how to do really well is influence people with propaganda and misinformation, right? And so if some bad actor, some foreign state could, make a lot of money by like convincing a bunch of people to vote the wrong way, like I'm pretty sure they'd figure out a way to do that, right?
Well, I think we're still pretty early in the DAO revolution, but so far I don't think we've hit any upper bound of sort of maximum DAO size, maximum number of participants, maximum value in there. Though there has been a fair amount of innovation on the tooling side, where it turns out that these are complex software systems that are interacting with complex social systems, and therefore you need new types of infrastructure to manage that. And not surprisingly, the ecosystem is responding, and there's DAO management frameworks and DAO management tool sets that are emerging and quite frankly, quite popular. And so I know a bunch of people who are doing that stuff, and it's super exciting to see. And again, I think we're pretty early in this entire revolution.
I mean, anyone can contribute. Like, that's the crazy thing right there. And it's like, you can be in Africa, you could be in the States, you could be in China, you can be in South America, and you can contribute. So like, excuse me, like you do have like you have centralized governments and centralized economies, but I think like this is speculation on my part, but like stuff with Conflux in the offshore renminbi can actually like like this offshore renminbi can be integrated into like a DAO, perhaps maybe not in China but somewhere else, and then allow like the general public, I guess I want to say global public, to interact together. So it'll be like China and the rest of the world being able to act together kind of via like a DAO that may not be onshore in China, but it uses some of this like a CNHC stablecoin to kind of interact between different worlds.
Can you sort of break down this power of community? How is it different than any other organizational structure that existed before?
Wow, I mean, that's a good question. That's a hard question too, right there. Again, it goes back like how do you get into like how do you get into an organization like if I want to work at like Facebook or Google like that, and like it's a lot of it's an old boys club first of all right there. So you got to know someone, particularly the skills and like in merit of course do speak loudly, but like you got to get in there, like you have to know someone to get in there. You go through this whole process, and it's like it is very like hierarchical, where a DAO is non-hierarchical, and again anyone can contribute to these DAOs, and anyone like can come up and they can become a leader in some way because of their like literally merit based. Like they perform actions instead of just knowing someone, but performing these actions, and they can benefit, and like who knows, like they do one thing for one DAO, then like this DAO is fungible with other DAOs, and like kind of this whole network of things where like it's a completely different, like versus just like Silicon Valley or something like that. You have a global network connected by DAOs, and people like taking their like immaterial labor and moving it back and forth between in some way.
DAOs initially started as a way to change the organizational structure of a corporate effectively. I think MakerDAO must have been kind of the first one that I really was exposed to effectively and looked into. So to me it was like, oh, well, you can have people from all across the world, and you can actually not also have a corporation where you have this entity, actual legal entity that exists, but instead it's distributed through the token holders. And so that's what dictates ownership. And I think beyond that, it's really about how can you use that to create consensus amongst the people that are holding those tokens from a governance perspective is one approach. And I think that can go on where like maybe you can dictate the direction of the product, maybe you can dictate certain changes on how the governance is even done. All these different things are now in control of the people that are holding those tokens. Kind of like equity votes, but the thing that I've noticed about equity votes is it doesn't really have that sense of community. You kind of just show up to your, I guess like brokerage account, or even if you talk to your broker to make a vote, you just do it almost, it's kind of like the best comparison I'd give is you kind of go into this black box and you just put a vote in and then you walk out. I feel like DAOs are more like you come into a big room and you've always been in that room for quite a bit of time. You know the people who are on the other side. You also have consistent calls, you have events, things like that. And so I think not only is it the technology, but also the energy around it. I think the technology actually is the more simple part. The community is actually perhaps the more sophisticated section of DAOs as a whole.
Yeah, what are some interesting other projects that you see that you think could not be possible without a DAO structure?
Maybe it's not about if it's not possible or not, because I think either side you can have entities that exist in a centralized manner or a decentralized manner. It's just a matter of like how you want to present yourself, perhaps. So I think it's all possible on either side. But maybe what's a more interesting angle to take it is with DAOs, again, it's kind of structured around that community. So you already have that vested interest on day one. It's also accessible to anybody who has an internet connection. So I think it democratizes that access. For better or for worse is a whole different discussion, but it does democratize that access. And so no longer are you supposed to wait for that retail IPO moment to get potentially into a project that you've really cared about for a long time. I think private placements, especially in the US, are super restrictive. You have to be an accredited investor usually, and that means either making $200K a year or having millions of dollars in assets, either of which are pretty hard to get to, especially if you're not making too much money. And so who's to say that someone who's making, let's say, minimum wage salary somewhere shouldn't be able to also have access to this asset class, which actually can provide much more upside opportunity for them?
I mean, it's still experimental, right? But like we're seeing the buildup of these protocols in decentralized finance, where capital is put into a pool, people pool their money together, and there are smart contracts that are allocating that capital based on different strategies to earn returns for the users and for the people that have deposited into the pool. And that was not accessible before. Like you couldn't even imagine having something like that and being able to participate in that, especially at a global level. So it's basically leveled the playing field, right? That's the way that I look at decentralized finance. And anybody in the world now has access to an asset class that is going to bring them financial returns, and that is something that they were deprived of in the past. And so I feel like that's really powerful. And with DAOs, we'll probably see some really interesting models where you'll be able to, for example, get into different pools based on their risk profile, right? So if you have a high risk appetite, there could be a strategy that a pool is deploying capital with that is more high risk, whereas something that's a little bit safer, you'd be probably going into like stable pools or something like that. So there's just so much to be built around these, and we're seeing a lot of projects building around this kind of theme.